Thank you. Thank y'all for coming out today. For the folks watching on Zoom, I don't know that we've done lunch and learn like this before. So bear with us. Hopefully we won't have any technical difficulties. We'll speak up as loud as we can without sounding insane. But you might want to turn your volume up. And if you're watching on Zoom, I believe if you pin the image that you're looking at, you'll get a bigger screenshot. So in this case, they would go up in the corner and pin this image if you wanted it to be bigger, but it's big enough here. So I'm Dr. Stephen Criswell. I originally had planned to be behind the camera today. Brittany Taylor-Driggers was going to be our host for this, but she was unable to be here today. But she put together some information for us, and we want to thank her for that. And in many ways, she is the vision behind the exhibit that we're going to talk about. And we'll come back and talk more about Professor Taylor-Driggers as we go along today. But let me go ahead and introduce my guests here who are an integral part of the exhibit at the Columbia Museum of Art that we'll be talking about. First, Jackie Adams. Jackie, will introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Jackie Adams, and I am the Director of Art and Learning at the Columbia Museum of Art. I've been there for about 7 years now. And what that means is that I oversee the curatorial department, the education teams, and the engagement team. So we like to call that the heart and soul of the museum. It's really the very mission-centered work. And I had the pleasure of working very closely with Brittany Taylor-Driggers, Alex, and Stephen to shape this really important anniversary exhibition. So it's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Alex. I'm Alex Osborn. I am an assistant curator here at the Native American Studies Center, and I'm also a Catawba artist. I do graphic design, photography, and illustration. And I am honored to have been part of this exhibit. It's a starstruck moment the entire way through.
Well, I guess we'll start with the what we're talking about. So our discussion today is about the Columbia Museum of Art exhibit, Resurgence and Renaissance Catawba Art since 1973. Is that correct? And it's built on or inspired by at least, the 50th anniversary of an exhibit by Steve Baker, who in 1973 put together an exhibit of Catawba Indian pottery. We'll come back around and talk a little bit more about the exhibit, but I thought maybe we'd start by talking about the origins of this exhibit from our side. And so let me let you know what happened here at USCL, and Jackie can talk about the museum, and then Alex, how you got hooked into it. So when I first started here in 2005, I was slightly familiar with this exhibit in 1973 at the old Columbia Museum of Art. I'd read Dr. Bloomer's book. I'd read a few articles and knew a little bit, but I didn't understand its significance. Our late archivist, Brent Bergen, also was curious about this exhibit and started looking into it. And we had a conversation back in 2005, 2006 about, hey, wouldn't it be great to do an anniversary exhibit, from taking Steve Baker's exhibit as a starting point and going up to, at that point, 30 years. And we talked about doing it. We didn't do anything. And then we talked about having a 40th anniversary exhibit. Never quite got around to it. But Brent was always interested in doing this exhibit, of revisiting Dr. Baker's work and updating it. And it's something, many of us here at the center had dreamed of doing, but weren't quite sure how to make it happen until Brent got an email from someone at the Columbia Museum of Art who was interested in this same idea, and the ball started rolling. And unfortunately, as you probably know, those of you who knew Brent, he passed away about a year ago. But the museum and the center were already starting to work on this exhibit. So Brent got to know at least that this exhibit was going to happen. And it's dedicated to him. And we were just delighted that it was able to take place. And the results are phenomenal. So Jackie, tell me a little bit about your side.
Yeah, we had a curator at the time, which was Catherine Walworth. And it was about the time I had just started to move into this new position where I was overseeing the curatorial team. And when we shape our exhibition schedule, we're literally doing it almost 3, 4, 5 years out. So at the time, it was probably about 2020, and we were already thinking about 2023. What kind of exhibits were we going to build? what were we going to schedule, and, what were we going to look after to do. So I remember at the time, Catherine and I had stepped into my new position, and Catherine came to me and she said, somebody from the Native American Studies Center reached out by the name of Brent Bergen and opened up this whole idea of this show and this anniversary. And really for us, it was the first introduction of that 1973 show. The Columbia Museum of Art has been around for 75 years. And, we did not, we don't know the whole, we know our exhibition record is pretty extensive, but sometimes curators are still learning as they curate shows at the museum. So when Brent called us, we immediately got very curious. And when Catherine came to me and sat down, she said, I think this is a really important show to do. I don't know all the research and all the history, but I just know this is important. So I kind of got the gist and the idea of what it was going to entail. And I immediately said, we have to do this. I said, I don't need to know any more. We're going to find out what this really all means. It's going to be a journey, a process of discovery for us, but absolutely we need to do this show. So back in 2020, we greenlighted it. And from there, we started a process. Catherine since had moved on to the Arkansas Museum of Art as a curator. So when she left, she transitioned. When she transitioned, the show became mine to carry forth. And so from then on, for about over a 3-year period, we really started the planning process. And for us, it takes about 3 years to really shape up an exhibition. That's about as much time comfortably as curators need, at least in our museum, to design these exhibitions. So 3 years really was just about enough time, but I've learned that over the process and over the period, it just, as you learn more, you discover more, you want to know more. And I just think for me, the process of this has been just an incredible, deep, meaningful learning experience. So I really, really want to thank the first meeting that we had. We brought Becky Garris together. It was the first, and I think maybe the only time I also met Brent Bergen as well. So, and I remember that Zoom call, we got kind of everybody in the room, we got all the minds together. And I remember how warm and fun that meeting was. And sometimes when you meet with you have planning meetings in museums, they're not that fun. They can be kind of academic and a little bit stodgy. This one was probably the most warmest meeting I'd had in a long time in terms of working on a community show like this. So, so then we started the process of planning. And Alex came along in the process as we moved along over that 3-year period.
So when we say the bulk of this work was Brittany Taylor Triggers and her selection of objects and her design ideas and working closely with the museum and being helped here by her assistant Sharon Norton and the rest of our staff here. And she brought our sometimes employee, Alex, on board. Alex, you talk a little bit about how Brittany roped you into it.
Yeah. I usually like to just go with the flow. And that includes like my work here. And I think it was really interesting because it was 2021 or 22, I don't remember, where I did some photos of the seniors at the senior center and also our previous artist in residence. And so at the Native American Studies Center. And after we completed that project, she was like, hey, I really like some of these photos for this other project I'm working on. And I was like, okay. And it was really exciting because she mentioned that it was something the Columbia Museum of Art and everything. And it was a very interesting development. So that happened and it was like in the back of my mind, but then later we started talking about more of a graphic project, which was the timeline that I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah.
And it just kind of came going with the flow. Sometimes just you see things just come together, and I feel like that was, you don't always see all of the hard work that people put into it, like Jackie and the team or Brittany or, Stephen. And so it's really interesting and an honor, to be honest, to have a part to play in that and then see how everything comes together. So that was That was my role in all of that.
We'll see the products of this role shortly here. If I get this mouse to work, let's go ahead and look at some of the images from the exhibit. Yeah, you know what? I think this is a touchscreen now.
You need to bribe the mouse.
Yeah, I think so. So let's see. So I'm going to share these images. Again, if you're watching on Zoom, if you'll pin this, it should show up a little better. Resume selection. Oops, back. What am I doing here? There we go. Okay, so again, this exhibit is Resurgence and Renaissance Art of the Catawba Nation since 1973, and this is an example of Alex's work. See more of that. So I guess we'll go back to the beginning here. So in 1973, the Columbia Museum of Art hosted an exhibit of 4 Catawba potters. The exhibit was organized by a grad student named Steve Baker, who became interested in the Catawba and in their pottery and befriended some of the potters and recognized this pottery as a traditional art form. The part of the significance of this exhibit is this is probably the first time that outsiders began to see Catawba pottery as art, and collectors began to see it as art, and the price of the pottery reflected that, and the reverence for the pottery began around this time. Up to that point, Catawba pottery had been made, and potters had been working for 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 years making this pottery. Obviously not the same potters, but they had been doing this for They had been doing this for generation and generation, and the pottery was sold and sold for very, very meager price, or often traded for goods or services, that sort of thing. It had been exhibited in museums, but generally natural history museums, sort of, I don't know, exoticizing, I guess, the Catawba rather than seeing this work as art. But Baker did see it as art, and he organized this exhibit in 1973, featuring the work of, and I always forget, Georgia Harris, Sarah Ayers, Nola Campbell, or Zeta Sanders. I always think Catherine Katie, but that's all. No, not in this exhibit. He was around, he was working, but for whatever reason, he wasn't one of Baker's selections. I don't know if he didn't want to do it, or I guess he wasn't as active then. And that's part of what happens too after this exhibit is the production starts to increase because potters can get more money for their pottery, start to get more attention for their pottery. You start seeing more and more folks do this. But Baker set up this exhibit and sale. It lasted how long? 2 weeks, a 2 week sale or 2 week exhibit and sale. And go ahead and tackle the apocryphal story here. Did you ever get a chance to talk to Dr. Baker?
Speaking with him this afternoon.
Yeah. Oh,
I've spoken to him twice on the phone, just very casually, and today we're actually going to do a formal interview.
Oh, okay. Oh. Yeah, and I asked him this once, and he neither confirmed nor denied it. But they denied it. But the story that I had heard was that the potters set up their pottery for sale and went back to their hotel or came back to Rock Hill or to the reservation. And it was all set up for sale. And Baker went around and added a zero to all of the price tags. Right. So this $5 pot was now $50. Right. $10 became $100. And again, story that I've heard, potters were very upset about this when they came back and saw this until they started selling. And we have a quote from Georgia Harris, I think, in the exhibit that says that I was really upset, and then I got a check. Yes.
Georgia Harris sold the very first piece of flour for more than $50.
For more than $50? She could.
More than $50. $45.
Yeah, 40 or 50.
All sold probably no more than $10 or $15 that day. And that was high.
Exactly.
Back in 20 years before then, they sold for change.
Yep.
Or for reform. Yeah,
and I think that's part of the significance of what happened here when this pottery is presented as art. And it didn't change the pottery anyway. And I don't necessarily think it changed the perception of the pottery among the potters, among the Catawba, but this market opened up and this interest began. And really, after 73, we start seeing the pottery displayed at the Bank of America Gallery, at the McKissick Museum, more at, eventually the Native American Studies Center, the White House. We'll get to that. And real quickly for folks online, folks that are here, if you want to see Catawba pottery, you walk right over there. You can see plenty. But for folks online, and just real quickly, what makes Catawba pottery? It's a millennial-old tradition, thousands of year old tradition, passed down from family member to family member, community member to community member, made with clay dug from the Catawba clay holes, made in the traditional method of pinching and coiling and hand shaping. No wheels are used, no finish is used. The pots are burnished. They're rubbed with a rubbing stone. They're fired in an open pit fire, except for Earl. There are some exceptions to these rules. And generally, the forms are traditional forms. They are the kind of vessels, the kind of shapes that you see generation after generation, but that often changes as well. And we can talk a little bit about that. That's sort of in a nutshell what this tradition is. And Baker recognized it as being very, very important and put together this exhibit, as you can see from these images here. Just wonderful work. There's our Zeta, and there's Chief Blue in the background there. And so I think Brittany put together these slides. I'm trying to remember what she's wanting me to say. Alex, do you know anything about this pottery class in 76?
I know a little bit.
Yeah.
So my great grandmother is in this photo. So this is one because there's not, there are photos of her, of course, but like, I don't see them as often as I would like. My great grandmother is the one that is the third from the right. And Roger, you might be able to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding is that this was part of an acknowledgement ceremony for master potters, which was a distinction that was actually bestowed by the state of South Carolina. This was not something that we necessarily held traditionally, but this acknowledged people who had incredible skill with making Catawba pottery and acknowledged them as artists within our community too. Do you have any thoughts on that, Roger?
The one real change that took place along the time you're talking about, 1973, is the color of the pottery.
Interesting.
That has to do with the wood they use and whether they burn it in a fire or in another.
Yep.
You don't see much color. I've seen the color pottery with as much as 4 colors.
Yep. And that actually is a good point. That's a distinction I would add, is that something that is very interesting with Catawba pottery is that it's unglazed. We never use a pottery wheel. And a lot of the times it's multicolored. You know, you have different, there is a technique to how it's fired, to how it's burnished, and all of those things that really impacts. There's a number of like chemical impacts on what changes the color.
You use the same clay hole all the time to get the same result.
Right.
Mr. Rogers referenced Earl Robbins, and I've told the story before of it. But I asked Earl one time I said, Mr. Earl, can you control those dark spots and the different shades and the pottery? He said, yeah, some. And I said, well, how do you do it? He said, far. And I said, well, for what? And he said, far. And I said, okay, but you do it for what? And he said, no, the heat, the far.
It's actually really interesting. A potter today too is Caroline Sanders. And she talks a lot about the methods that she uses to make the pottery appear how she wants to. There are elements within the clay that we use that impact that color. So there's a certain amount of it that is outside of the artist's control. But the methods that we use are definitely part of the creativity of it, I guess.
And if I can speak to that, this past Sunday, we had Rue came and did an Indigenous Discovery Tour for us at the Columbia Museum of Art. And Caroline happened to be there. She showed up and she was there, and it was really delightful to see her. So her and I went and walked in the exhibition together. And it's always a treat when I can have an artist, especially an elder, by myself, and we could talk. And we walked around her snake pot and her frog pot, which is a beautiful piece in of itself. But we talked a little bit about the firing process, and she was examining her pot and the snake, the black snake that wraps around it. And she really just, even for herself, is kind of amazed at how the fire whipped up and created this black smoke on that black snake. She said, I could have never planned that. And it's the only part of the pot where you see the black color. And it gives me goosebumps because it's that's like all of the magic coming together for her. And she said, that is the spirit. That is the essence of what this process does. And I couldn't have even controlled this. So it's moments like that, it's nuances like that really elevate what you're seeing in the exhibition to true artistic pieces.
I think what I would add too is that, bringing it back to this photo, each one of these women have very different styles and methods of how they create their pots. There are similar forms, there are similar practices, but if you see pieces from each one, there's going to be minute differences. Obviously, they're made by different people. Something that I found really cool for context too is that making pottery back in this time was a family affair. My great grandmother, I pretty recently learned that she would sculpt the pot, and then my great grandfather would fire it. So sometimes it was kind of a collaborative process, but it's really neat to have that as context too, because you have these women who are recognized as artists and creators. But I think that like many things within our community, there's many people that contribute to the creation of different things, to different actions. And I think, in this process and in the gallery and in talking about different subjects, that's something that's really come to mind for me, is the community piece of creating pottery at Catawba Art. So,
are all of these women Catawba?
Yes.
Indians or part?
No, they're all members of the Catawba Nation. Or were. They've all passed away.
And actually, so more context on that too. Nanny, I called her Nanny. She's third from the left. Her sister, her half sister, is right next to her on the other side, and then you have Nola Campbell, Evelyn George, and Roger. Can you? Yes.
Yeah. So Georgia Harris, Evelyn George. Is that Nola?
That's Nola Campbell.
Nola Campbell. Who's that?
That's Helen Beck.
Helen Beck.
Francis Wade. And then
Mildred
Blue. Thank you.
Catherine Kennedy. There's Catherine.
Yep.
Something. So let's talk real briefly about somebody who's not in this picture, and that's Sarah Ayers. Sarah Ayers was featured in Dr. Baker's exhibit. A lot of folks around the state know her work to some extent because she lived in Columbia or Lexington for a good while and was very prolific and very eager to demonstrate and share the pottery tradition. But when we were talking about the pieces that we wanted to feature in this exhibit, Brittany and I discussed the fact that we had to include a piece by Sarah Ayers that is a double head etched pot. A pot that has on the ends, it has the iconic Catawba Nope-Kihi.
Thank you.
Thank you. AKA King Hackler. The image, if you go in the gallery here, you'll see plenty of those lugs or those heads. And we wanted to include this piece because I'll tell the story real quickly. Back in the early 2000s, I guess it was, the early mid 2000s, when Obamacare was being presented. Paul Matheny, who's the curator at the South Carolina State Art Museum, or State Museum, Paul sent me an email with a link to a Today Show interview. And Meredith Vieira, used to be on the Today Show, was interviewing Barack Obama in the White House Library. And I thought, why is Paul sending me this? We have insurance. I'm fine. And I wrote him back. He said, well, check it out in like 6 minutes, 12 seconds or whatever. And I did. And I paused, and there was a piece of pottery on the table right behind Meredith Vieira. Barack Obama, the president, is looking at this piece of pottery. Looks awful lot like a piece of Catawba pottery. I wrote Paul back and I said, is that a Sarah Ayers? And he said, sure, it looks like it. So I'm going to find out if it is. And I tracked down the White House decorator, which is a job. That's a job. The White House decorator who said, yeah, that during the George H.W. Bush administration, they redid the White House library. They went over to the Museum of the American Indian, and they got about half a dozen pieces of art. The only piece of art from this side of the Mississippi is that pot by Sarah Ayers. So there's a piece of Catawba pottery in the White House Library. When Donald Trump was elected, I called Lindsey Graham's office. It was during the next discussion of Obamacare, and everybody was pulling their hair out. And I called Senator Graham's office and said, I have a question. It has nothing to do with insurance. It has to do with art. Is there a piece of Catawba pottery still in the White House Library? Within 24 hours, one of his people called me back and said, yeah, it's still there. Joe Biden came and visited us before the election, so I'm assuming she's hanging on to that piece. But and I think, again, that's something I think every school child in South Carolina should learn, that there is a piece of South Carolina Catawba Indian pottery, Catawba Nation pottery in the White House. That was Sarah Ayers, right? And this is the piece here. Yeah, exactly. But this is the piece. You can see it on the back shelf there. It's not exactly the same, but it's a very similar piece and was confirmed as being from the Museum of the American Indian as being a piece of Sarah Ayers, who is now on display at the Columbia Museum of Art. So let's talk a little bit more about the current exhibit. So, Alex, were you involved with the discussions, or Jackie, were you involved with the discussions with Brittany about making this about more than pottery and more than 1973?
Absolutely, yes. For us, we wanted to lean on the experts here at the Native American Studies Center and the Catawba community and nation itself. It was important for us, at least, to let the experts and the citizens take the lead. So Brittany and I talked about how that might look, and she very much said to me, Jackie, when we create this exhibition, I really want to center Catawba voices, not just through the objects, but through the design of the show. So you can put the objects on display, and then a museum person can design the graphics and come up with the text panels and all that good stuff. But what we did was we leaned on individuals such as Alex, who are multi-talented, to bring those voices and that cultural significance into the exhibition. To me, I think there's a third R that you could add to the title of this show. It's Resurgence, Renaissance, and for me, it's also reclamation. Reclamation can come in very grand and broad ways. It also can come in very much quieter ways. And I think that, like I said before, we could have had staff that created the labels, but we decided no. What would truly make this a truly Catawba show and a Catawba-centered show goes well beyond the objects. So I thought that's where Alex kind of came into play, and Becky Garris came into play, because we incorporated elements of storytelling, folklore, and language. And all of that is woven in.
That really hit me in the face too, whenever I was talking to Brittany about putting the gallery together and everything, is that for so long, and I say this with respect to both of you, in academia and in art spaces, our story and stories have been told by people who are not within our community. And so this was a really neat and amazing opportunity to share what that might look like, not only today, but we were telling our own story, and we were gifted with the privilege of telling our story for ourselves. And I just want to kind of call out, there are a lot of people here from the Catawba Senior Center. Thank you so much for coming, for one. But I would, I don't know if we're going to have a question and answer session, but I would just kind of call out to everybody, how often has it been that we've told our story ourselves? You have people that'll stop by and talk on your front porch, and share stories and things like that. But when you step outside of the tribe, you see in newspapers, you see in articles, you see all of these things of people missing details, or people not really having the heart of what it feels like to be Native. Whereas there's so much more representation and meaning behind an exhibit like this one, because we have been able to put that, to participate in putting this together about ourselves.
I think for me, I was incredibly humbled from the get-go. And I think being humble in these situations is very important in the work that we do. I'm sure I could have taken on a scholar's, approach and things like that. But that wasn't what was important. What was important is that I needed to step aside, and our staff needed to step aside. And we did that. And we did that through learning, reflecting, and most importantly, listening. So as we shaped this show, we felt like that was incredibly important to embody in anything that we decided about the show. So,
and, I can only speak for myself, but I really commend you all for doing that. You know what I mean? Like the study center has been really good about that for a while now, I think. But, in a space like yours, it takes some humility
yes.
to share stories in the way that you have. And that's really impressive. So thank you.
And I want to talk about this image, but I just want to add to what Jackie was saying and publicly thank her and commend her, because we've now worked with a few museums here and there, but we've never had an entire staff come here to work with us and learn from us and learn from our Catawba friends, and to go over to the cultural center and to reach out and to do as much as they have done. It's a model, I think, of how to work with indigenous communities and marginalized communities in a respectful and thoughtful way. And just I commend you on that. And so we talked about Alex's art. Let's look at Alex's art. This is a piece, you did this, yes. Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts behind it, what this is, and a little bit and how you did it?
So Brittany Taylor Driggers asked me to do 2 drawings, both of which made it into the gallery themselves or itself. And they were based on, I'm trying to think of the best word for this. They were like observational studies that Stephen Baker did of Catawba pieces. One of them was a chief's head. The other one was a turtle. And I don't want to insult Dr. Baker by any means, but they were very observational. It was like this, the kind of drawing you do in like science class of like, this is what a cell looks like, except, but it was a chief's head, and there was also a turtle. And when she and I talked about this, she was like, I want to see this in your style. And I was like, Brittany, what does that mean? Like, what is that? And I wanted to take this and run with it, because working for the tribal government back when I did, I had a little bit of practice with drawing chief's heads. And I kind of wanted to see what this would look like, a little bit more realistic, but also like in a way that put a little bit more humanity into Nopkihi's face. And I also wanted to draw on colors that, to me, might be found in pottery. I don't know how well I achieved that.
When I first saw this, I just was, I was blown away, because I'm a charcoal drawer. I'm a drawer by nature. So charcoal, I understand really well, and am a figure, and I draw the figure a lot as well. So when I saw this, I go up to this wall in the museum and I touch it, I rub it, because it has that surface quality to it, much like the pottery does. It's
huge.
It's really big. And it just, like the pottery, it just feels like it has an airiness to it. It feels like you want to touch it. It feels natural. It to me, I thought it was a beautiful 2-dimensional translation of the 3-dimensional pottery surfaces and process. I thought it was just wonderful.
So now that my ego is as big as this room, the other thing that I kind of drew on with this, because this particular sketch I did digitally, and it took on a number of versions, but it's very subtle. But you can see with some of the colors that I purposefully wanted it to appear charcoaly, because that kind of referenced our process with pottery. And so I drew on that with some of the textures and some of the colors. And I think that like seeing a face come out of that for me kind of represented, a face being molded out of something else. And I don't want to go so far as to say like it represents pottery, but I still wanted it to kind of allude to that feeling of a face coming out of something. Yes. And this image is small here, but the actual image is probably as big as this wall. So it's very larger than life. So it turned out really fun in my opinion. Sorry?
Is that
That's his.
No, I drew that. Yeah.
It is. I mean, the term for it is awesome. Awesome gets overused, but it is all. It's just because it's numinous. I mean, it hits you like. It's just big and it's functional. It points into the.
I think too, it was meant to be directional. That was something that Brittany asked because originally it was facing the other way, and she was like, "Wouldn't it be cool if this like pointed into the gallery?" But like you see these faces on our pottery sometimes, and they're little, but like the impact that those little faces have go back generations and generations, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. So I think that by like making this large and have like a scale, it's kind of meant to represent or interpret that feeling that I think, at least for me, some of our community get from like the little chief's heads. You know what I mean? This is the mold or the chief's head that my great grandmother sculpted. You know what I mean? Or and that's an adjacent feeling to seeing a giant face, I think.
Yeah.
And the original, is it more color? Because this looks gray.
Yeah. So the image itself is the colors are pretty muted because they're meant to kind of draw on the colors of pottery. But in person, I would say that the colors are a little bit lighter. So it does come across as a little bit brighter than what you see here.
Did you get your clay across the river or a revelation?
Well, that's going to ask Alex, are you a potter?
I am not a potter. This is only a drawing. So this was not a photo or anything. Yeah. So
I'm saying there was at least three. There was a yellow clay hole, a red clay hole, a blue clay hole, and a green one on the reservation.
Yep. From my understanding, I don't even know where my family got our
Nobody more.
Right.
There's also the covered up by the roots. Yes. Whenever they paved roads, a lot of, and some of the clay holes did dry up.
Okay, come back to that. So this is an image here of the exhibit or from the exhibit. You can sort of see the layout there, the colors. As this was developing, Brittany emailed. First, she texted me and said, "What do you think about this color?" And do I know color? I don't. I don't do colors. But and just an amazing layout of grouped by forms, grouped by, to a certain extent, artists, and I think in a couple of cases. And as we get out of this, there are two main spaces. One that has what Jackie explained. I'm doing a terrible job.
This is one of the two galleries that you see when you go into the exhibition. So what we did in this gallery, of course, you see the blue walls. Brittany really chose blue to represent water. So all of this has a very deep connection to natural elements. So the blue is meant to symbolize the river, the Catawba River. So in this exhibition, the way you're meant to kind of see it is to look first at the pottery and the tradition and the ancestral roots of the nation and of the tradition of pottery. And so what we did was on the back wall, aligning the back wall toward, on the far end of the image, we did little vignettes of different shapes and vessels, and that was to show that you see prominent shapes and vessels throughout the tradition. Everything from animal effigies and pots, a King Hagler pot display, snakes. So you see different arrangements of very common vessels, but what you see is within that cluster, you see different people making them. So what you can see, especially in the chief Nopkihi, in the Chief Nopkihi display, you'll see a Caroline Sanders pot next to, I think, a Susan George pot. And so you'll see the differences. You'll see some slight nuances between how makers kind of bring their own touch and their own style to a vessel that's been around for many, many years. So that is on the back wall. And then as you come into the center of the gallery, we really wanted to highlight some standout pieces that sort of like exemplified how artists are really sort of pushing the form or have really mastered the process. So in the middle, you'll see Chief Harris's. He's got a beautiful raven pot. This pot is the epitome of just elegance and grace, but strength as well. It is a beautiful, beautiful piece. Caroline Sanders' piece is there as well. You'll also see some objects that are a little bit more rare. So the Columbia Museum of Art in 1973 acquired a little elephant piece that is highly unusual to see, because elephants obviously were not native to this area, but there's usually a story around why they got there. And I've heard something maybe that there was a Catawba, a circus element visiting the area. So maybe a maker picked up on, those exotic animals coming in. So there's an Earl Robbins piece. Again, you'll see some of that display of like how Earl really expanded in scale and just the challenge that comes with that. So that gallery really illustrates tradition, but also illustrates different styles, different aesthetics, different approaches, and some of the evolution. It also, we have a case in there that shows the 1973, I call them the pillar potters, but they're the 4 women who really were, just the pillars of that exhibition. And so a case sort of pays homage to them in the 1973 show. And then onto the right of your screen, you see some people checking out this really wonderful graphic that Alex designed as well. There's really like several big graphic elements in the show, all designed by Alex. And this is the second one that is just an incredible piece to talk about. So
yeah, one of the really nice features of the show is you have those 4 pillars, and then you have their children or grandchildren represented. In case of, for example, Chief Harris, there's a piece in the exhibit, that beautiful raven pot. Chief Harris is, of course, the grandson of Georgia Harris, who's one of the featured artists from the 73 exhibit and in this exhibit. And because of these familial connections, but also student-teacher relationships, we wanted to reflect something that Dr. Baker had done. In his original exhibit with those 4 artists, he had created sort of a genealogy, sociogram, whatever you might want to call it, with the featured artist and whomever she learned from and whomever she learned from, and it was usually female, going back a few generations, both in terms of family origin, but also artistic teacher. But his charts were very, again, scientific, very, very charty, straight lines. And he had some images, some emblems, some seals that he used. But Brittany asked, if I remember this correctly, Brittany asked Alex to sort of update this and talk about the struggle that you went through.
So honestly, I've been working in environmental graphics for a little over a year now. And when I say environmental graphics, they're like graphics that fill a space. And this was probably one of the hardest projects I've ever worked on. For a number of reasons. One, it goes into the community space that I was talking about, of like people, I think, have this really like black and white idea of you are a potter, you learned from so-and-so. And like sometimes that is that way, but sometimes you learned from 3 different people. Sometimes you learned from 2 different people. And that was really challenging, not only to verify, but also to show in a way that might I'm not really sure, that might like make sense outside of the context of that conversation. So here we also wanted it to feel not so Spartan or rigid, because along with that community element, there's something to be said about it. There's an ebb and flow. This is something that's passed down by generations, but it's passed down to some people and other people don't pick it up. I don't see myself as a potter. That could change in some years. I don't know. But for right now, that's, I like doing things like this. But this is just a snippet of some of our family that have, both literally descended from people within our community, but also the blue line highlights, maybe who taught who learned from who. And you can see that that's quite a bit all over the map, because as a community, we share with each other. And, you might learn from your great aunt's cousin, or you might learn from your grandmother's sister, or both. Yeah. So, I special shout out to Becky and Sharon for helping me with some of the dates. I am a graphics person, not a historian, and that really came forward. The other thing that I don't want to call anyone out, but the originals on these had Old Indian on it, and that was kind of like throwing our history back into the ether a little bit, and that was a very like academic phrase. I'm sure that he didn't mean anything by it really, but we wanted to replace that too. And that's part of why I kind of just drew a chief's head, because that's a symbol that we have used for a long time. But I wanted it to go back to, we've been doing this for millennia. We've been doing this for hundreds of years. And it's not just that it's like old Indian, that was our family. That was our, generations and generations before. So I think we also wanted to show this with a little bit more reverence than just an academic drawing. So
much better. I think Brittany and I had a conversation about a timeline of Catawba pottery, so that we would have the Civil War, Catawba pottery, the Revolutionary War, Catawba pottery, the pyramids, Catawba pottery. Right. Not quite as visually interesting. Oh, could you mention I'm fascinated with this, the curved triangles, why the triangles have the corners.
So one of my first ever job, I was like 18, I think, was I worked for the tribal government. So I've actually worked for the tribal government twice. And so my first like adult job, if you will, was I was a trainer at the Achievement Center at the Longhouse. And what that was is we were under a special program that provided focus to providing technology training to seniors, like how to use computers and things. But in this program that we were a part of, that expanded to anyone within the community that wanted to come learn. And one of the participants in that program was a gentleman by the name of John George. And he was a medicine man for our tribe. So I was working on a display one day, and I've been thinking back through this whole process, actually, through both working for the tribal government and some of the artwork that has like kind of been inspired by this whole process. And like that was the impetus of this, what does modern Catawba artwork look like? And this presentation, it was, really simple. It was like a display board and construction paper. And I was like, John, I don't have much. And he was a good friend of my dad's. And so like, I knew him from since I was young. And I was like, John, I don't have really anything here, but how can I make this look Catawba? Like, what would that look like today? And he looked at it for a minute and he just said, take out the corners. And I was like, what? Like, how is that going to make it more Catawba? And he had the way that he communicated about these things was so kind. And so he was just like, yeah, take out the corners, Alex. And I like curved the corners a little bit. He was like, no, more. And I was like, okay. And I was like, what is the significance of this, John? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me. And he was like, traditionally, we believed that evil spirits resided in corners. So ever since then, whenever I have designed something specifically for the tribe, whether that be a story that our people have heard or anything like that, and it's actually a little bit of an homage to him, I think, that I take out all the corners. So every single piece of this, there are no sharp corners. That is a very specific symbol that I use in all of my work that is meant to be Indigenous, and it is respectfully a little bit of an honor to him.
So, and one of the things, again, we mentioned about the exhibit is that while it is the pottery exhibit serves as a jumping off point. The exhibit is about Catawba art, which goes beyond the pottery, includes, of course, the pottery, but also includes a number of other forms. And the quilts and the images and the hat and the other pieces that are represented in the exhibit are wonderful examples of the creativity of a community that's beyond the sort of obvious pottery part of it, but just the artistry. And even what fascinates me are those that like folks like Becky or Faye Griner who work in different forms, in basketry and pottery and maybe quilting and just these very, very creative people who found an outlet, some in pottery, some in other forms. And part of what's featured in the exhibit are these photographs by Alex. Alex, you can talk a little bit about these photos.
Okay, the one at the top right, I have never seen that picture before.
That was from Brittany.
And Brittany, when you watch this later, we're gonna have a chat. This was really cool. This was, I think it was a grant
from the South Carolina Arts Commission grant,
and it was kind of focusing on documentation. And so, one of my favorite forms of art is portraiture, and I love taking photos of people. I think that it documents a person. It also captures someone's memory. It captures a moment. There's a lot of different things that go into it. And so my goal with this was to show the personalities of the people that we photographed. And so those of you in the Senior Center, I've seen a couple of you that have participated in that. So thank you again. But also with this particular set was chosen from a selection that was former artists in residence for the Native American Studies Center. So you have Monty Branham, you have Keith Brown, you have Caroline Sanders, and then you also have Becky, who is hiding behind some feathers. And then you also have Faye Greiner. And I don't want to toot my own horn by any means, but each person brought themselves, to the point where Becky and I it was some cosmic coincidence. Becky and I ended up doing 2 photo shoots because the original set were lost. And it just so happened that I wasn't happy with them. The second time around, we really saw more of Becky, and that was pretty cool. I was panicking, borderline crying, calling Brittany, I don't know what happened to these photos, but it worked out how it was supposed to. So on the most recent episode of the Binder podcast, I actually talk about, which is a podcast through the Columbia Museum of Art. I talk about these photos because the realization happened for me when I was actually talking with my boss at my current job, my day job. And we were talking about the method, and these are actually printed on fabric in the gallery. And as photographers, we're normally really picky. You actually see a beautiful selection in the space that we're in of how these photos are developed and printed. That is part of the artwork in photography, is the process of creating an image. But for these, the point of the artwork was not the development or the process. While there is a process element, the artwork in this is preserving people, representing our culture, representing our art, representing us as a community. And so that was a very interesting and stark realization, which I'll tell the story about the top right image or have Stephen do it. But Jackie, do you have any thoughts on that?
As I'm sitting here in the Native American Studies Center with you guys, there's a photography show that's up right now. And before we started the conversation, you had pointed to the photographs. And I noticed that they are film photographs, film prints, and they're around from the early 1990s. And everything that you're saying is bringing those photos to life for me, in a big way, because it shows a point in time that is past, but also something that preserves a point in time. So I think that even though these are contemporary images, one day they will be reflective images. They will be images 20 years from now that will reflect back to a point in time. That documentation is super important. It is super important. And when you see the images on the wall here, you realize that it captured something that easily could have been forgotten, overlooked, or lost. So this is an important art form for many reasons. So
thank you. I think too, all of these artists are still with us too. So the reflective piece of that, we have told stories orally for hundreds to thousands of years. And I think I see photography and some forms of illustration and a couple of things like that as an extension of that storytelling. I have a few projects that I'm working on now that has really brought that focus back for me of we have to tell stories, but now we have the means to keep them. We have the means to keep them, to share with future generations, to share with each other across broader distances or in ways that are more accessible to people. So I think that's kind of notable with these. Stephen, I love the way you tell stories. That is part of what you do. Can you tell us about the top right image?
Tables have been turned. Yeah, well, so I was lucky enough to be here for a lot of this, maybe all the photos, and it was amazing because there were stories being told as Alex was taking these photos. He would ask a question, they would tell a story, whatever, to the point where some of the folks got emotional. There's some wonderful pictures as part of this of I think Becky and Caroline cutting up and just laughing their heads off, and it was a wonderful experience. But he apparently told folks just to bring whatever they wanted to wear. And Monty Branham over here brought a selection of things. And at one point he put on his American Indian Movement T-shirt, and we decided to go outside. And in this sort of guerrilla photography moment, Brittany and I were back on the sidewalk like sane people, and Alex and Monty are in the middle of the road. Stars, luckily the cars had stopped coming. And Alex is shooting him, as you can see up here. And Monty turns around and puts his fist in the air. At one point, he's holding the little prayer bowl, hands it to Brittany while he's getting ready, and I can't hold this. He gets very nervous about it, and then he gets it back and he raises that fist in the air. And Brittany and I look at each other and go, "That's going to be good." We were right.
I specifically remember with Brittany too, because Brittany turned to me and she's like, "Can I do this?" And I was like, "He handed it to you, didn't he?" Like that. But
I would also make a comment about having the photographs, and it goes back to something that Becky Ayers had said when we started learning that there are deeply ingrained stereotypes of Native people, how they look, how they dress, how they show up in the world. And it has been perpetuated by media stereotypes, all kinds of ways of delivering stereotypes. And I think that people's curiosities are natural. And I think that's okay to be natural. But I think what's important about these photographs is that it does help to counter where stereotypes have been sort of developed biases in people. And it gives you an understanding of, it lets you unwork that imagination a little bit in a healthier way. So I really do think having representation of people in the show is so important. It's just truly important. And I remember Becky said something, people think that we still walk around in leathers and feathers. There are these really perpetual stereotypes that are still existing, and we need to counter those. And the show does that. The show is meant to be, there's advocacy built in here. There's activism built in this. And I think it does that.
It shows who we are today.
Shows who we are.
And that is amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know why Brittany gave us a picture of me and Becky talking, but that's a nice picture, Becky.
I'm sure you were up to no good.
I'm sure. This may have been, might have been one of the days we were taking pictures. And this of course, is an image of Brent Bergen, who I referenced earlier, our late archivist, who, in a lot of ways, this exhibit is Jackie's doing. It reflects Alex's work. It reflects Brittany's vision, but I think the inspiration for us all was Brent as well. And his desire to see this event happen, or this exhibit happen. And so I'll stop sharing. Let's see. Okay, I think that's right. So I'm delighted that the end result is so beautiful, so informative, thoughtful. Brent, I'm certain would be very proud of it. And would be exhausted by the amount of work that went into it by other people. Sorry, inside joke. But it's a wonderful exhibit, and we want to finish up here with a few final comments and take questions. But if you haven't had a chance to see it, head down to Columbia, check it out. It is an amazing exhibit, beautiful artwork, beautiful pottery, but also beautiful photographs and quilts and other pieces, beadwork, and again, other wonderful exhibits going on at the same time at the museum while you're there. So just some final thought. I guess, Jackie, can you talk just a little bit about this experience for you? And because I know you mentioned that when you first started this, you had very little knowledge of the Catawba, and you were kind of surprised by Baker's original program, and then maybe the future, ideas for the future.
Yeah, I think for me, it goes back to that idea of what I didn't know and how much I had to learn. I was a student of K-12 education in South Carolina, and I tell everybody about the show. I said, it's just amazing how much my education lacked this learning. And it's really tragic. All South Carolina students should know about the Catawba Nation and about the history. It's incredibly powerful learning. So for me, the experience has been a real adult education that I didn't get as a child. And in some ways, I have felt like a child, actually, throughout the process. And I think that's been scary at times because you're scared as an adult that you're going to say something wrong or do something incorrect. But as an adult, I've learned to trust myself a little bit and say what I don't know, I go to who do know. So I think trust building has been really important as part of this experience, and humility and humbleness. And anytime I talk to somebody about the show, I try to kind of gauge where they're coming from, because I think all of us have to some degree that kind of learning to do. And then I bring them into the show and we kind of go from there. So for me, what I want this show to result in, I want this show to result in deeper education for the citizens of this state, for everyone in this state. This needs to have an impact in terms of awareness that then leads to better education, in particular for our children of the state. The other thing is it was sort of embarrassing, frankly, to me to think how our museum has not engaged before 2023 with the Catawba Nation. So for me, from a leadership perspective at the museum, my hope is that this can lead to more sustainable practices. And that's what I'm really looking forward to. So I know Alex is coming back. We have a big exhibition in the fall of a fashion designer named Alexander McQueen. And we've asked Alex to come back and be a designer as part of that exhibition, which is going to be great. So he is going to bring his cultural Catawba significance to the show, which is going to be wonderful. And if Alexander McQueen were alive today, I think he would absolutely be humbled by that. Absolutely be humbled by that. So yeah, I have other thoughts too, but I mean, I'll just stop right there.
What I'll add to your other thoughts is that it's a process.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like there's a lot to digest. And I think that as an Indigenous person who has conversations pretty regularly with people who don't know about us, we don't expect anyone to know all about it all at once. There is a learning process for all of this. And Jackie has done wonderful about going through that process a little bit more than most. And it's really, those are the things that we like to see. We like to answer questions when we can. We like to make sure we like to be asked those questions with respect. And I think that is part of the conversation that goes on in media and in society today. So,
and the exhibit is up until?
It's open till September 3rd.
September 3rd, and the museum is open Monday.
It's open Tuesday through Sunday, 10 to 5, and on Thursdays we're open till 8 o'clock. Every first Thursday we have a free day all the way till 8 o'clock at night. And all Catawba citizens have free admission to the show. And I would extend that definitely beyond Catawba, that any citizen of any of our tribes in the state have free admission. So,
is there anyone to explain or talk to you about as you're viewing the display to instruct you on what?
Yes. So we do have docent tours, and we do have, they're called Ask Me About the Art, where docents kind of roam on certain days. But I would say if you want a guided tour, someone that will kind of walk and talk you through it, you can schedule one through our website and bring a few people and maybe do a small group or a big group, however you want to do it. But we do have a docent tour who has been especially trained and knowledgeable to guide people through the tours or through the exhibition.
the staff here at the Native American Studies Center worked with their team to answer questions and to really prep them for questions that people might have. So
you can always come back here with the questions.
Yeah.
But there, if you check the Columbia Museum of Art website, there are a number of events coming up, including a larger tour that Rue George Warren will be doing. Brooke Bauer will be giving a talk about her book, Becoming Catawba, and I'm sure that will be informative both for her book and for the exhibit. That's tomorrow or Sunday.
I'm going to have a conversation with Brooke Bauer on Sunday at 2:00. Yeah. We're going to talk about her book, Becoming Catawba. And then Rue, who did the Indigenous Discovery Tour, was amazing. He goes to our collection, and he started with our George Washington portrait. And right then and there, he says, I'm not a historian, but I'm going to tell you some history. And we're going to start here with George Washington, because George Washington was an important figure, both for and not for the Catawba at times. So Rue will take you through our collection and point out certain pieces that are very, very historically significant to the Catawba Nation. And then he goes down into the exhibition and he talks about more history there. It is wonderful.
And a little taste of that too is that Nopkihi actually advocated for the Catawba to George Washington. So, this figure that you're seeing, he had a really impactful, play in the South because of his interaction with that for the tribe. So that's something to read on if you like.
That tour is August 3rd at 6:30, but you have to register for it ahead of time. So
you have to register for the tour because Rue can probably handle about 30 people before it gets too packed in the galleries. But it is a fantastic tour, and it's free August 3rd. And I hope we can do more with Rue in the future. Oh, do you want to talk about the August 20th? Yeah, that's going to be really cool too. Yeah.
So August 20th, we will be having an event, or the Columbia Museum of Art will be having an event called Aquade, which is like a gathering. And it's meant to focus kind of on the contemporary aspects of what is being highlighted in the gallery. But there will be some tours that day too, talking about a lot of the art if you'd like to check that out.
And I think one thing I'd love to end on is when we did, for me, when we did the opening ceremony, Chief Harris was there and we had a wonderful day of food and performances. And I remember Chief Harris got up there, and I mean, he was on Boyd Plaza in the middle of downtown Columbia, hundreds, if not thousands of people on Main Street. And we had him on a microphone, and he did this really warm welcome to everybody to come in and see this exhibition. But he said, now let's celebrate function to form. And for me, that was so significant to hear, because I see the show through an art history lens. And for me, this show and everything that I've learned and all the artistic traditions that are in the Catawba Nation is not that much different than what you see from around the world throughout art history, to be honest. We had a Rodin show a couple of years ago, and like many artists throughout art history, throughout the world, they learn their traditions, they learn how to do things by the rules, but then they evolve them, they break the rules, they try different things. And this is how art history is shaped. It starts in one way, but somebody comes along and challenges things and pushes it in another and another. You see that within this exhibition. So Caroline Sanders is a great example of that. She learned the tradition. She understands the tradition. She is evolving that tradition. So anyway, wonderful, wonderful thing to kind of end on tonight. So,
do we want to answer questions?
Yeah, we have a question. Yes.
I see that maybe it's not about art, but I see the entrance to the reservation on 5. Yeah. Do y'all want us to come in?
So the question, I just want to repeat it. So the question is, are non-Catawba allowed to visit the reservation?
That's a great question, because when you go to Tribes Out West, sometimes there are different, can you enter or not? And our reservation is very open. So you can visit the cultural center. You technically could go to the Longhouse, but that's not quite as interesting because it's very administrative. Right. But I would definitely recommend checking out the Catawba Cultural Center. They have, it's another example of us telling our own stories. We have archives there, we have exhibits there, and we also have the Catawba Trading Post, where you can buy artists from that, or buy artwork from Catawba artists. Thank you. You can't purchase artists. Yeah. Yeah. Please stop by.
Yeah, and of course, if you're not familiar with it, in November, the Catawba Nation will be hosting its Yapi-Ishwa Festival, which is the Saturday before Thanksgiving this year. Probably 9 to 5, 10, something like that. It's a wonderful event. There are lots of Catawba culture on display: dancing, drumming, pottery making, pottery for sale, and most importantly, fry bread. If you've not had fry bread, really have fry bread. Other storytelling.
Monday through Saturday, I believe it's 8 to 5 or 10 to 4. Thank you. Yep.
But if you just Google Catawba Cultural Center, you should be able to find their hours on there. So yeah. Other questions? So do we have anything online? Fry bread power. All right. Yes.
I am so moved by in this time where history is now trying to be written by people who are not a part of history, or doing away with it. And you are creating a model that is showing them how to find true history. Like that is the part of history. I'm really excited that you can take this model and really share it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I want to thank Jackie, Steve, and everybody. These are large hands, strong hands, making this happen. But also, I had to keep running through your mind. Dr. Harris always said, about us, through us, about us. And this is the first time that it's been about us, through us, with us. So,
I think one thing before we break or anything is that there are a number of people from the Catawba Senior Center here, and y'all's voices are really important. So is there anything that anyone from the Senior Center would like to add or comment on?
Yes, please.
Carol, did you want to add something or? Yeah.
I gave him his first piece of credit.
Amazing.
And he returned back to me.
That's amazing.
Oh, incredible. Yeah, that's the story. So did you see the exhibit? Did you go down and see the exhibit?
Yeah.
Yeah. What did you think? Well, good. I do want to. I want to thank y'all for coming. And it is always terrifying to me to talk about Catawba culture in front of Catawba people. And I'm happy to take your criticism and suggestions afterwards. And I didn't want to say anything to Jackie before because it is quite intimidating. And I thank y'all for coming, and hopefully we've exercised some of that humility that hasn't always been there. Not you, but it's example that. Well, thank y'all. Chris, any final comments before we sign off? All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Thanks for joining us online. You heard about next month's Lunch and Learn. Please tune in or come by for that. Come by the center Tuesday through Saturdays, 10 to 5 until 7 on Thursdays. Cultural Center. Go by the Cultural Center on the reservation. See pottery, buy pottery, and visit the Columbia Museum of Art and see this wonderful exhibit. That's it. Thank you.